In August 2013, the body of 31-year-old Darius Mitchell was discovered in an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. The investigation that followed unraveled a chilling web of deception, betrayal, and murder. Years earlier, Darius had taken out a $250,000 life insurance policy, never imagining it would become the motive for his own execution. But behind his death lay a far more sinister truth, one carefully orchestrated by Melissa Carter, the mother of his child, and Jamal Westbrook, the man she had chosen to take his place. In January 2013, a series of events began that would set a deadly plan into motion, a plan that would end with a single gunshot and a child left without parents. The morning of August 6th was still young when the call came in. A lone jogger making her usual route through the deserted streets of an industrial area on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, had noticed something strange. A car, sitting at an odd angle beneath the dim glow of a failing street lamp, looked abandoned. Its windows were shattered and the front driver's door was slightly ajar, swaying just enough in the gentle morning breeze to suggest someone had left in a hurry. By 6:45 a.m., the jogger had stepped closer, her initial curiosity quickly turning into dread. Inside, a man sat motionless behind the wheel, his head slumped forward, pressed against the steering wheel as if he had fallen asleep. But the deep red pool soaking the front of his shirt and the way his body leaned unnaturally to one side made it clear. This wasn't sleep, this was death. The jogger had fumbled for her phone, hands trembling as she called 911. She didn't need to check for a pulse. The sight alone told her that life had left the man long before she arrived. By 7:10 a.m., the area was secured. Blue and red lights flickered against the cracked pavement as uniformed officers sectioned off the lot with yellow crime scene tape. The man inside the car was identified as Darius Mitchell, a 31-year-old mechanic and father of one. He was well known in his neighborhood, a man who worked with his hands, who built things, who fixed things. But now, there was nothing left to fix. His body sat rigid, frozen in time, his face bearing the lifeless stillness of a man who had not expected death to come for him that night. The first real clue was obvious: the execution-style gunshot wound to his temple. There was no chaos, no signs of struggle. The driver's side window had been blown out from the inside, scattering glass both inside and outside the vehicle. A single .45 caliber shell casing rested on the passenger seat, untouched, undisturbed. Whoever had fired the shot hadn't panicked. There were no multiple gunshots, no frantic attempts to make sure he was dead. One shot, clean, precise, intentional. Detectives arrived within the hour, led by Detective Carl Bennett, a man with years of homicide cases under his belt. But even with his experience, something about this scene bothered him. It was too controlled, too careful. There were no signs of forced entry. The victim's wallet was still in his back pocket, cash intact. His watch remained on his wrist. His car keys were in the ignition. Nothing had been stolen. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Something else was missing: his phone. That was the first red flag. A man's phone was his link to the world. It held his messages, his calls, his connections. Whoever killed him had made sure to take it, to remove whatever conversations or details might have revealed what had led him to that parking lot. But there was always something left behind. Even the most careful killers made mistakes. By 10:30 a.m., detectives had secured surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m., August 5th. The footage was grainy, but it was enough. It showed Darius pulling into the parking lot, his car coming to a slow stop beneath the very street lamp that now flickered above his body. A second vehicle had already been there waiting. A shadowy figure emerged, stepping toward Darius's car. The person moved with confidence, without hesitation. The way they opened the passenger side door and slid into the seat suggested familiarity. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone Darius had trusted enough to let into his car without question. The footage showed them sitting there for 8 minutes. No sudden movements, no struggle, just two people talking. Then, at 10:55 p.m., the passenger moved. They turned slightly toward Darius, a smooth, deliberate motion. Then, 3 minutes later, the passenger exited the car, stepping out with the same casual ease as they had entered. They walked back to their own vehicle, got in, and drove away. Darius never moved again by the time detectives knocked on the door of Melissa Carter. It was August 8th. The investigation was just beginning, but her name had already come up. Darius's ex-girlfriend and the mother of his 5-year-old son. When the officers arrived, Melissa answered the door, holding her son on her hip. Her eyes were puffy, her face lined with exhaustion. The detectives expected hostility, resistance, maybe even confusion. Instead, they were met with a woman already grieving, already shattered. She told them she hadn't spoken to Darius in days. Her voice was unsteady, her hands shaky as she pulled her son closer. She didn't understand why they were there, why they were asking about him. She asked if something had happened, and when they told her, she collapsed. Tears fell freely as she held her child, rocking back and forth. She whispered that Darius had been a good father, that despite their past, he had always cared about their son. She asked how this could happen, who could have done this, but something was off. Detective Bennett had seen grief before. He had seen real grief. Melissa's tears were real, but something about her sorrow didn't settle right. It came too quickly, too naturally, almost as if she had been preparing for it. And there was one thing he couldn't shake: the footage. Darius had met someone that night, someone he trusted, someone who got into his car willingly. Melissa had just said she hadn't spoken to Darius in days, but what if that wasn't true? As detectives left her house, walking back to their patrol cars under the heavy August heat, the first seeds of doubt were planted. The crime scene had been too perfect, the execution too clean, the missing phone too deliberate. The pieces didn't fit yet, but soon they would, and when they did, the truth would be far worse than anyone imagined. The cold air of January 2013 carried the weight of unfinished business between Darius Mitchell and Melissa Carter. Once, they had been inseparable, two young dreamers caught up in a love that felt unbreakable. But love had never been enough for Melissa. It wasn't that Darius hadn't loved her. It was that he hadn't given her the life she believed she deserved. They had met in high school, a story that should have been sweet. Darius, with his easy smile and strong hands that could fix anything, had been the steady one. Melissa, ambitious and restless, had always wanted more. Their relationship had been full of firsts: first kisses, first promises, first heartbreaks. But when she got pregnant at 19, those dreams shifted. For Melissa, it was a trap. For Darius, it was a reason to build something real. He became a mechanic, working long hours, trying to provide. He believed that love and responsibility were enough, but Melissa saw the way other women lived, the expensive bags, the designer heels, the kind of life that came from men who made real money. The resentment festered. It only grew worse when in 2011 she found out about Tanya Reid, the woman who changed everything. Darius had never been a cheater before Tanya. He had been steady, predictable, loyal. But something about their relationship had worn him down. Maybe it was the fights, the way Melissa made him feel like he was always falling short. Or maybe it was just the simple human mistake of thinking the grass was greener somewhere else. Tanya had been a quiet escape, a mistake that cost him the only family he had ever truly known. Melissa left. She packed her things and took their 3-year-old son with her. She told herself it was because of the betrayal. But deep down, it was more than that. She had already been looking for something better. By mid-2012, she had found it in Jamal Westbrook. Jamal wasn't just a new boyfriend. He was an opportunity. A man with deep pockets and deeper connections, the kind of man who understood the hunger in her better than Darius ever could. Jamal gave her a taste of something different. Money that flowed freely, nights at clubs where people whispered his name like it meant something. But despite everything, one problem remained. Darius had never changed the $250,000 life insurance policy. It had been something they took out years before, back when they thought forever was real. He had never updated it, never thought to remove Melissa's name. It was still there, untouched, waiting like a locked treasure chest. The money wasn't for her, it was for their son, but the difference didn't matter, not to Melissa, not to Jamal. Because March 2013 changed everything. The night had been like any other when Jamal first suggested the idea. He sat across from Melissa, his fingers lazily tracing the rim of his whiskey glass. His words were smooth, effortless, the kind that could slip into a person's mind without resistance. He hadn't said it outright. He never would. He was too careful for that. But the meaning was there. Darius was a problem, and problems had solutions. At first, Melissa laughed. The idea was ridiculous, but as the days passed, it kept coming back, curling around her thoughts like smoke. What if something happened to Darius? What if that money, sitting useless in an insurance policy, could be hers? What if she never had to worry about child support battles, about struggling for control? By late April, she had made a decision. She would earn back Darius's trust. She would play the perfect ex-girlfriend, the one who had grown, who had changed, who wanted to co-parent peacefully. She would make him feel guilty. She would remind him that their son needed stability, that maybe, if they tried again, they could be a family. Darius, always the one who wore his heart too openly, believed her. The act wasn't hard to keep up. Melissa knew Darius better than anyone. She knew the way he carried guilt, like it was stitched into his skin. He had never truly forgiven himself for Tanya. He still wanted to do right by their son, and Melissa, she made him believe he could. By July 2013, she had him right where she needed him. Melissa and Jamal set the murder into motion on July 15th. It started with a suggestion, one wrapped in concern. She told Darius that they needed to think about the future. What if something happened to him? Wouldn't he want their son taken care of? Darius had nodded, slow, thoughtful. He had always been too trusting. By July 20th, the new policy was approved. Melissa still held the $250,000 payout in her name. By July 29th, she made the final move. She asked Darius to meet her that night. She chose her words carefully, knowing which strings to pull. She told him she needed to talk, that she wanted to fix what had been broken between them. She told him she missed what they had, and Darius believed her. He showed up late that night, pulling into the empty lot where she told him to meet her. He thought it would just be Melissa, but Jamal was waiting in the shadows. That was the last night Darius Mitchell would ever see, because August 6th, 2013 would be the morning his body was found. The night of August 5th was still and warm, the kind of southern summer evening where the heat never truly fades, even long after the sun goes down. A single street lamp flickered in the empty parking lot, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked pavement. It was 10:30 p.m. when Darius Mitchell pulled in, his black sedan rolling to a slow stop beneath the dim glow. He had been expecting Melissa Carter. For the past few weeks, she had given him hope that they could rebuild, that the mistakes of the past could be forgotten, that maybe, just maybe, they could be a family again. He had driven there believing that tonight would be a turning point, but as his headlights swept across the lot, illuminating the lone figure standing near a second car, he realized Melissa was nowhere in sight. Instead, Jamal Westbrook was waiting for him. Darius didn't panic. He had never been the kind of man to run from a confrontation. If Melissa had sent Jamal instead, then maybe this was about something else. Maybe it was about money. Maybe it was about setting boundaries. Maybe Jamal, as much as he had taken Melissa from him, wanted to make sure their situation stayed civil. The car door opened and Jamal slid into the passenger seat. No sudden moves, no raised voices, no tension. For the next few minutes they sat there in the stillness, two men engaged in quiet conversation. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a casual meeting, an exchange of words between two people who, despite their complicated history, had no reason to fear one another. Darius didn't see it coming. The gun was raised, a single gunshot. The bullet tore through Darius's temple, shattering the driver's side window, sending glass exploding into the warm night air. His body jerked once, violently, before slumping forward against the steering wheel. Blood splattered across the dashboard, dripping down onto his lap, staining the beige leather seats. The metallic scent filled the car, thick and suffocating, but there was no chaos. No signs of struggle, just silence. Jamal didn't hesitate. He moved with practiced ease, wiping down the gun, ensuring there were no fingerprints left behind. He reached over, rifled through Darius's pockets, and pulled out the phone. That was the only thing that mattered. The one piece of evidence that could trace the meeting back to Melissa. The screen still glowed faintly, a call log still open, the last call received just minutes before the murder. The passenger door opened and Jamal stepped out. There was no urgency in his movements. He didn't run, he didn't glance over his shoulder. He simply walked back to his own car, got in and drove away, disappearing into the night. By the time Melissa Carter's phone buzzed at 10:58 p.m., she was already lying in bed waiting. She picked it up, read the two simple words that confirmed everything. "It's done." She exhaled slowly, pressing the phone to her chest. Her plan had worked. By 6:45 a.m. the next morning, the world would know that Darius Mitchell was dead. And by noon, Melissa Carter would become the grieving mother. Melissa had played her part well. By September the 10th, the $250,000 life insurance payout had cleared into her account. The money sat there untouched for only a few days, as if she was giving herself time to grieve, time to make sure the world believed she was still drowning in sorrow. Then, everything changed. By October, she had left behind the small, cramped apartment she once shared with her son. She moved into a brand new townhouse, one that smelled of fresh paint and expensive hardwood floors. She traded in her old sedan for a luxury SUV, the kind that turned heads when she pulled up to the daycare to pick up her son. And then came the trip to Miami. For 1 week, she and Jamal lived like royalty. 5-star hotels, expensive dinners, shopping trips where price tags no longer mattered. She didn't hide it. She posted photos, beachfront views, champagne toasts, a life that no grieving mother should have been living so soon after burying the father of her child. She thought no one was watching. She was wrong. Detective Carl Bennett had been working homicides for nearly 2 decades. He had seen every kind of killing, crimes of passion, calculated executions, desperate acts of rage. But something about Darius Mitchell's murder had never sat right with him. At first, it had looked too clean. There was no robbery, no forced entry, no panic. Whoever had killed Darius had done it without hesitation. That meant one of two things. It was either a professional hit, or it was someone who had spent enough time thinking about it that they were already emotionally detached by the time they pulled the trigger. But the first real crack in the case came from Darius's phone records. By late September, Bennett had been reviewing the call log from the night of the murder. Darius had received a call minutes before his death, but the number was blocked. That alone wasn't suspicious. Plenty of people use blocked numbers, but what was suspicious was where the call had come from. Cell tower data traced the call's origin to a location near Melissa Carter's home. Bennett knew what that meant. Melissa had told them she hadn't spoken to Darius for days before his murder. That was a lie. Then came the next red flag. Melissa's financial records were pulled as part of routine background work. It was standard practice in any homicide case. Most of the time, nothing came from it, but this time the numbers told a story. 3 days before the murder, August 2nd, 2013, Melissa had made a $10,000 cash withdrawal. Not a check, not a wire transfer, cash.
Where had that money gone?
A second set of financial records provided the answer. The recipient of the deposit was none other than Jamal Westbrook. Melissa had paid him 3 days before her ex-boyfriend was murdered in cold blood. Detective Bennett leaned back in his chair, staring at the case file spread before him. It wasn't just suspicious, it was obvious. She had thought she was careful. She had thought her act was convincing. She had moved too quickly, spent too recklessly, lied too easily. And now all the pieces were falling into place.
It wasn't a question of if she had done it anymore.
It was only a question of how much longer before she got caught. The air was bitterly cold when January 20th, 2014 arrived, the kind of morning where breath hung in the air and frost clung stubbornly to windshields. Inside a quiet neighborhood in Atlanta, a team of officers moved swiftly, their boots crunching against frozen pavement as they approached a 2-story townhouse. Inside, Melissa Carter was still in bed when the loud knocks came. The kind that didn't wait for a response, the kind that meant something was wrong, the kind that meant it was over. She didn't fight, she didn't scream. She only stared, her expression unreadable as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Across town, Jamal Westbrook was pulled from his car just minutes later, his face shifting from confusion to anger as the reality of the moment settled over him. By mid-afternoon, both were seated in separate interrogation rooms, the walls pressing in, the weight of their choices suffocating. Melissa held strong. She was calm, controlled, her voice even as she denied everything. She met every question with an answer that led nowhere. She painted herself as a grieving mother, a woman who had suffered an unimaginable loss.
But Jamal cracked. The walls closed in on him faster. When the threat of the death penalty loomed over his head, his mask slipped. At first, he tried to dance around the truth, but the pressure was relentless.
Piece by piece, the entire plot spilled out. He told them about Melissa's plan, the $10,000 payout, the text message confirming the kill. He told them about August 5th, 2013, about how Darius had never seen it coming. He told them how Melissa waited at home, counting down the minutes until she knew she was free. By July 2014, the courtroom was packed, the case having gripped the city in morbid fascination. Melissa sat expressionless, her once polished appearance now stripped down to prison-issued clothing and hollow eyes. The verdict came quickly. First-degree murder, life in prison without parole. For Jamal, the sentence was lighter, but not by much. 40 years, the weight of a lifetime behind bars. But the real victim was neither of them. a 6-year-old boy, now without a mother, without a father, left in the care of a system that could never replace what was stolen from him. The insurance money once meant for his future was frozen, except for the trust fund set to be released when he turned 18. Justice was served, but the cost? It was far too high. The legacy of betrayal stretched far beyond the prison walls. By 2015, Melissa's name was spoken in hushed whispers, her case one of Atlanta's most infamous crimes. Some called her heartless, a woman who had sacrificed everything for greed. Others claimed she had been driven by desperation, trapped in a life that had left her with no other way out. But the truth was simple. She had everything she needed, and she still wanted more.
Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates. And you can check out another insane case we have, the case where a wife cheats, then beats up husband, destroys house, and plays victim before arrest. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comment section.